Hello again. Thanks for sharing your valuable time. We're in a predicament with our capacity to afford life that has seemed to have caught people by an awareness that might have been lacking from what I would classify as basic economics. And I guess in relation to the nature of economics, it determines the value of money. Now, I'm not going to tell you what money's worth or worth less. We won't go into the concepts of fiat versus gold back. And we're not going to start talking about the BRICS currencies that are, on the verge of decimating Western fiat capitalism. But instead, look at the circumstances that created the overnight wealth, we might say, that has been very much the focus of people's success since mid-2020. What we do have is the consequences of such money printing on a global scale, predominantly Western. When I say Western, I mean Western economies. But the idea of finance and the ballooning of asset markets, such as shares, commodities, real estate. Meanwhile, the restriction in regards to supply and what could be seen as an increased demand due to the nature of free money that had been delivered across the planet at that time, did create two problems. One of which is bloated asset markets, and things that bloat generally for their own health are required to retract once again, of which those that were going to the moon were quite adamant that there was not going to be a concern in relation to the devaluing of their successes that seemed to be maybe ill-conceived. But from the nature of bloated asset prices comes inflationary pressure, along with supply and demand increase in prices, which is an inflationary trend as well. Of course, with inflation on an economic scale, we have a very large problem if it runs out of control, which has been the status quo throughout many of the Western economies, and ultimately, therefore, the global economy. So the idea of inflation becomes a concern for people in the cost of living. So while there might be a increase in the value of perhaps their net worth, so does the cost of maintaining a lifestyle within that economic factor. And to rein in inflation, we have only a few tools in regards to the subject itself. If we're dealing with supply and demand, one would need an oversupply in regards to bringing down the demand and therefore the price per unit. Now, unfortunately, state of the economy, cost of resources, input resources, cost of aspects of different commodities, daily markets, essentials, food, power, accommodation, building materials, capacity to build more buildings, enabling a stagnation or a maintaining of rent prices, circumstance to supply of energy prices, supply of food availability, all have a major factor and aspect in regards to how inflation is actually going to get engaged. In that, we become a little bit unrealistic, perhaps, in regards to how this becomes a potential problem or how we look at the solutions. Of course, this took everyone by surprise. Varying expert economists start to come out of the woodwork and speak into the subject matter at a time when it's too late to do anything about. So the consequences continue. Interest rates from a central bank capacity, the place where the money was lent from to begin with, has an opportunity to, well, destroy the economy and ultimately push the economies into recession, which, unannounced because of social unrest and the consequences of that particular conundrum, we have actually been in recession since before the GFC. We've been in recession since the GFC. And we've been in recession since before the cerveza sickness and the bloated and ballooning asset markets. So the next step from recession would be same as a psychological train of thought that requires certain medications to compensate, i.e. depression. One thing that has not apparently been evident in this world of finance since before my time, and probably many of yours as well. So we're inexperienced, and therefore a bit unrealistic about the outcomes that might occur in relation to it. The one and only way for a central governing bank to control inflation is interest rates. And with the debt of the humanity in today's age, interest rates play a very big part in affordability of what they have been indebted to, let alone what they might choose to invest in regards to future, which ultimately has an effect on all aspects of business and economy in the present and foreseeable future, to start to question how the cycles will ever come back into a form of balance and how people will fare in the process of experiencing the demise of asset markets. As we've seen, as I've spoken and been ridiculed for speaking, into the future of timelines from the last 18 months to 2.5 years, there has been a very large portion of relinquishing the values that have been bloated in our share markets, obviously crypto markets, various commodities that are circumstantial to supply and demand, and obviously the consequences of that. For instance, food and the capacity to plant on large agricultural scales that have been controlling the global food system since the 50s. So we've come to a conclusion that the value of money is one thing that is something that might be a subject that we choose to pay a little bit more attention to, being that we put so much effort and value into the accumulation of assets through debt, and now have vast concerns about how one can maintain the debt. From a personal scale, corporate scale, and a national scale, every aspect of our economies has never seen the levels of debt in regards to any time in history. So a 2 or 3% increase in interest rates on asset markets that have bloated significantly since, let's say, the 70s or even the 80s, let alone post-war or the late 1920s and early 30s, we have seen concerns in regards to the outcomes of what I call the fallacy of fiscal and fiat money. That being said, there are versions of it that could have alleviated people's pain by understanding the simple economics. To a degree, if something goes up very quickly, it does not have the foundations to maintain those levels, and therefore must come down. And it's in the coming down that is a very great concern in relation to the other outcomes of increases in the costs of the creation of products that are more expensive than ever and likely not to be as invested in. And for those reasons, we become concerned about how our choices in a past period of time will affect our capacity to maintain what we think is our aspect of assets in the short, medium, and unfortunately long terms. Understanding these kind of economics is what's led me to predict the tech burst in 99, 2000, 2001, the GFC from 2006 through till 2009, and then obviously in relation to the circumstances of recent years, patterns that are simple economic equations and fundamentals, which we might seem to think are highly valuable and we can manipulate if we can write it out. But the knowledge of gaining assets, the knowledge of gaining value in our life, requires us to have a very broad understanding of what that kind of value, where it comes from, is it sustainable? And if we are, as we should, operating to our highest capacity, we would be looking at the principle of investment, where we understand the principles and we maximize the gains, and then we maximize the losses. And circumstantially, very few have capitalized on that. Now, passing from a previous video of mine, just in the last 5 or 6 seconds, I have had 7 volcanic alerts come up on my phone whilst integrating into this subject matter. So the demise of an economy is subject to really what's going to be occurring socially, environmentally, and the consequences of that on the economics themselves. So I believe that there is a convergence. There is a convergence to put pressure on society. There is a convergence to bring society to its knees in the process of making a takeover, demolishing the middle class, pushing people into poverty, integrating the jobless, questioning where our food and accommodation will come from. All the very relevant subjects that have been circling in recent months, but too late to be able to do anything about, one might think. However, if you do happen to have questions, please put them in the comments below. I have an opportunity to do videos on the subjects that are going to impact humanity on the greatest scales that we have never experienced, and for that reason alone assist you in the process of supporting sustainable lifestyle systems and our ability to see the foreseeable future through the conundrums that are likely to continue. It's very challenging times, and I understand that this is a very touchy subject, and I recognize the difficulty that people are having. And in that, I believe we do need to reach outside our comfort zones and make peace with the contrarian nature of what might be a system that has been broken for long enough, and kind of just kicking the can down the road through quantitative easing in just about every nation, from their central banks bailing out the system to hide the problem that has been occurring just due to a level of entitlement that this modern day and age seems to want to tell us that we have able to experience. The future is now, and the consequences of that are to come. So please, reach out. Learn from the experiences of those that have avoided the consequences and capitalized on the problems that everyone else seems to be going through. And we all might recognize the priorities that we will place on our world today. Respect to you all. Thanks for your time. Bless.